In a new interview on Comedy Central's The Daily Show, President Biden suggested that he'd support federal legislation protecting transgender youth's access to gender-affirming care. Let's watch.
What's going on in Florida is, as my mother would say, close to sinful. I mean, it's just terrible what they're doing. It's not like, a kid wakes up one morning and says, I decided I want to become a man, or I want to become a woman, or I want to change. I mean, what are they thinking about here? They're human beings. They love, they have feelings, they have inclinations that are, it just, to me, is, I don't know, it's cruel. And the way we do it is we make sure we pass legislation like we passed on same-sex marriage. You mess with that, you're breaking the law, and you're going to be held accountable.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's been leading the effort to limit care options for trans children, tweeted a response saying, quote, "It is not sinful to prohibit the mutilation of minors. It is not acceptable for the federal government to mandate that procedures like sex change operations be allowed for kids."
A Miami Hyatt Regency Hotel is the latest target of DeSantis' anti-woke crusade. His administration is taking away the hotel's alcohol license for hosting a Christmas drag queen show in December. Now, the governor's office maintains was a sexually explicit show where minors were in attendance. In the state of Florida's official complaint, government lawyers cited these photos as the only evidence. So there is a dispute about whether or not any minors were in fact there, but obviously a lot of folks are arguing that it's a rather authoritarian, kind of stick to use to try to take a restaurant's liquor license away.
Speaking
in order
of authoritarian liquor licenses.
Okay, New Hampshire.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Look, I watched some of the footage from that event. It seemed to me inappropriate for children, but if you want to bring your kid to an R-rated movie, that's your call. I don't want to tell parents what to do, honestly. So do I support this? No. Again, I would leave this to parents' discretion. I think the number of children globally who have been harmed by drag events is somewhere in the low, I can count them on one hand. So again, conservatives are getting really worked up about this, and I think it's not all that important, and I don't want to bring in the state to override parents' decisions. Again, you might decide that's not a good event to bring your kids to, and I would probably tend to agree, but I don't want to override parental decision making with any of these things. What Biden was saying at the start of the clip, though, I don't quite agree with. I don't think it would be helpful necessarily to have a universal federal policy on this. What he is saying that he was mocking the idea that kids might just wake up one day and say they wanted to transition. Maybe that is not something that happens, but a lot of the criticism of initiating gender-affirming care for young people does hinge on the idea that there is a social contagion effect going on, and that, yes, actually lots of kids are doing exactly that because they want to fit in, or there's some coolness factor of it, and they're not kids that actually are transgender, and if we just rush them through the process of doing it, that would actually be harmful. So I don't know who's right, but people, including people who have some knowledge of what actually goes on at transgender clinics, there's been a lot of conversation about that kind of whistleblower who talked about it for Bari Weiss's Substack, and then she got a lot of pushback, and then there's pushback to the pushback, et cetera. I don't know, but there is a legitimate debate, I think, going on about whether how Biden framed that, if that's correct at all.
Yeah. So, for one, there's I think, perspective issue going on here. Famously, when asked how many kids he thought were in any kind of hormone therapy, Matt Walsh predicted, I think, a number in the millions, when in the reality it's in the thousands. Even if you double or triple or quadruple or multiply by 10 the estimates that are out there, it's nowhere close to what Matt Walsh was talking about. Some numbers say that it's been about 15,000 minors since between 2017 and 2001 for whom this has been an issue. And that's not to say that you can't think it matters, or that those kids don't matter, or something doesn't matter if it's just affecting a small number of people. But there does seem to really be a proportionality issue when you have millions of people, kids, being molested on a regular basis in the United States of America. Who knows how many kids in foster care, rampant food insecurity. 1 in 5 American kids are food insecure, and none of those issues take the same kind of public precedence as this concern over trans kids. And moreover, when you look at the slate of anti-trans laws, I'm looking right now at the ACLU's tracker that says 416 bills have come down the pike in the 2023 legislative season, which obviously just began. You have to ask the question how much this is really about people having this deep concern of kids, and how much is it trying to weaponize an issue that I think is unfamiliar to many Americans to try to get political consensus for candidates and political figures who aren't really doing a lot to make the lives of average Americans better, as they're struggling to afford groceries, as inflation is high, and as the quality of life has gone down over the last 20 or 30 years for all Americans.
Yeah, I don't really want to bring the government in to adjudicate this an issue that should be, I think, between kids, their
but that's what's
families,
happening.
and their
When you look
sure,
at 416 anti-LGBTQ bills coming down the pike in the United States, I'm looking at a map right now, and it's all but like 7 states that don't have a bill like this happening. So often federal legislation, they step in because the states, overwhelmingly, federal legislation exists because states are trying to constrain the rights of people living in the states, not the other way around, right? That's why we have civil rights legislation. That's why we have protected classes, because state by state wants to try to limit the freedoms of the people who live in their states. So what you're saying, I agree with, that these decisions should be left up between a parent and their children. Then how do people in the states where these bills are being promulgated and at times passed?
I wouldn't initiate the issue with the bill. I'd probably oppose most of the bills at the state level. I don't think a federal overcorrection is going to be good either. I think there is a debate to be. There's more educating everybody needs to do to understand exactly what is going on with the process of kids deciding to initiate transitioning. And I don't think the way Biden framed it there is helpful. I think there's legitimate questions about all that. I don't think the government should intrude and forbid it or anything. I just want, like, everyone should want this. Everyone should want kids to get properly vetted care to make sure that this is really the right course of action for these series of irreversible or only semi-reversible procedures.
It depends
is
on
the
what we're
right thing
about.
for the individual kid.
That's
what's wrong with that, right?
Here's the problem.
Don't we all want that?
Well, there's so many things in there. One, some of the gender-affirming care that is being banned by some of these bills include just dressing in the gender that you prefer. It would be illegal to do drag, as according to at least one bill that's being promulgated. Okay, that's certainly reversible. I'm wearing pants today. I might be wearing a dress tomorrow. Do you know what I mean? Moreover, the effect of some of these hormones, just depending on the age of when they're starting, et cetera, or more or less reversible. But I also think there's a little bit of or I shouldn't say reversible, have more or less of potential long-term effect, and those things are being studied. And I understand that there's some dispute.
The long-term effects are still being worked out.
And some differences between how we handle these things and how some countries like, I think, Denmark and Sweden handle these things, which is fine. But let me just finish this point.
Sure.
The point there is that while that is a concern, it's also a concern and there are long-term consequences for going on birth control at a young age, which many girls do because they have heavy bleeding or because they have other kinds of issues that the pill is administered for outside of contraceptive uses, right? There are all kinds of medications.
Well, but I would say the same thing. Not only would I not want to ban contraception, I want to make it easier for people to get it. But I would want young women to understand what all of the relevant side effects are.
But people aren't, well, some people are, but most there's not this suite of legislation that's coming down saying we're going to have state laws that prevent kids from getting the psychiatric medications they want, from getting the reproductive medications they want, from getting the cancer, maybe an experimental cancer treatment that their parent wants to put them on that has some negative side effects. And all these other contexts, we understand that these are medical decisions to be made with families, even ones we sometimes disagree with. You know, there's families out there that are feeding their kids all raw meat diets and doing weird things that I wouldn't approve of, or just feeding them unhealthy food that I wouldn't approve. There's all kinds of things that are happening that have long-term effects on kids. And I'm just trying to disentangle how much of this is sincere commitment to wanting kids to be healthy and how much of this is being used to shoehorn in authoritarian policies that are geared at preventing cultural changes that some people on the right don't want.
Again, I don't agree with the policies. I just, for the kids themselves, because if your kid or a kid says they're going to do something a little bit outside the norm, you're going to push back. Since you want to get a tattoo, parents are going to be like, "Are you sure about that?" I don't really want you to.
Yeah.
So this shouldn't be the only thing that's like, "Oh, great, let's do that." We're doing it today.
But that's the thing. That's the big dispute. The right is framing it as you can walk into a gender clinic and be signed up for a double mastectomy tomorrow. And while I think that there are probably, just like in all cases of medical malpractice, moments where you can cherry pick and find kind of a premature assignings of hormones or things like, or even surgical procedures, overwhelmingly that's not the case. And historically, people are really upset about it because historically it's been so difficult for trans people to get any treatment at all. The hoops that they've had to jump through are so high and so onerous. So that to the extent that now there is a little bit of like social opening up to make the access to those kind of procedures easier, suddenly that's being characterized as kids being able just to wake up one day and go into a doctor and change their gender. That is what's irritating to people. And that's not to say that sometimes pendulums swing too far in one direction, back and forth. I'm not saying that that's maybe sometimes doesn't happen, but those rare instances, I think, are being exploited to paint a picture of a disaster, an epic disaster that requires there to be almost 500 pieces of legislation that are aimed at constraining the rights of average citizens.
I don't want there to be 500 pieces of bad legislation. I think we're really trying to grapple with and better understand how exactly it works for kids to go down this road and how easy it is. And I'm seeing a lot of
why is that even a conversation that is happening at the level of the governor of Florida? I mean, I really do feel like I'm hearing Ron DeSantis talk more about these kinds of issues than I hear him talk about the $15 minimum wage that citizens of his state voted for.
Well, he probably doesn't support the $15.
Well, of course, but why is that? I mean, people really have to ask the question, even if you completely disagree with quote-unquote transgenderism, and maybe you didn't even mean it.
You can always go, why do you care about this? You should care about this instead.
No, but look, I have my own peccadillos. I have my personal social issues that I care a lot about, but that aren't really national issues that I know are very personal to me and selfish. But because I don't know, wouldn't call it a class trader, because I have sensibilities, because I have family members and people in my life that I care about that I know are struggling. What I want my political leaders to be doing is working for the things that are working to fix the problems that are most threatening to our lives. And I'm sorry, like it is always going to be relevant to this conversation. Why it is that this is the focus, and not all of the things that are actually affecting people in the day-to-day. People who've never met a trans person, know no trans people in their lives, are voting on the basis of what Ron DeSantis or whomever is going to say about trans issues, and not all about whether or not they have a policy to lower inflation, whether they have a policy to lower the price of groceries.
I mean, people probably care about multiple things.
Well, we're not talking about multiple things. And no, I don't just mean you and I.
Talk about a lot of things.
I mean the general public. And so people have to, you're allowed to care about whatever, but is your political prioritization being affected by the emphasis that is coming down the pike from the media? Do you care about it more than everything else? If so, if not, why are you talking about it more than everything else? And is the fact of the conversation being geared in one way or the other affecting our voting choices in a way that are basically conceding our right to fight for our economic equality that really, really matters to us in our daily lives?
Fair enough. We'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.